Hello everyone. So in this lecture we will see the types of variables. So when we talk about the types of variable, basically there are two divisions, division 1 and division 2. So when we talk about division 1, it is based on the type of value represented by the variable. Okay. So this is the division 1 and division 2 will be based on the behavior of the variables, right? So first we will talk about division 1 and then we will go with division 2. In case of division 1, as I said, it is based on the type of value represented by the variable. So in division 1, there are two types of variables, primitive variables and reference variables. So when we talk about the primitive variables, let's say if I write int x1 equal 46, okay? So x1 is primitive variable, okay? Let's say if I write boolean b equal to true. So these are called primitive variables. Why? Because it represents, so x1 is holding the 46 value, which is the primitive value. B is holding the boolean value, right? So this is the primitive variables. Another examples can be, let's say float f equal to 10.0f, okay? So these all are the examples of primitive variables. So now when we talk about the reference variable, it basically represents the variable, basically holds the object, right? So for example, let's say if I create the object of a class, let's say there is a class called employee main method, okay? So let me create the object of a class. So here this employee, right? Employee is a reference variable which is holding the object. Okay. So this is when we write new and the constructor name, since the class name and the constructor name is always same. So once we write new and then the constructor name, it means we are creating the object of a class and that object will be stored in the heap memory. And this employee is a reference variable. It is not an object. We have to be mindful about. Okay, employee is an reference variable which is pointing to the object which has been created in the heap memory. So now comes the division 2. In division 2, we are defining the variables based on their position, where exactly we are defining those variables, right? So for example, in case of instance variable, let's go to IntelliJ ID and then we will see what exactly is instance variable. So I have created a very simple demo class and we have a main method. So let me create three objects quickly. So let's say the class name is employee and we'll create the object of a class public employee object and let's say int ID and then string name. Okay, and we will initialize them id equal to id and similarly this dot name equal to name. So in this example, as you can see in the employee class at line number 7 and 8, I have created two instance variable int id and string name. So for every employee, the id will be different and name can be different. So these both are instance variables. Okay. And so what I have done is, like, I have created three objects, E1, E2 and E3 are the reference variable which are pointing to corresponding object. So when we will need the instance variable, right? So when in case of instance variable, it will have a separate copy for each object. So for example, in this employee class, I have created three objects, right? Employee 1, employee 2 and employee 3. So these variables id and name will be created under every object. Okay, so if I go to this example paint, so you can see, like, since I have created three objects, right? So what will happen is, like, for every object, under every object this id and name will be created. Okay, similarly for employee 2 object, id and name will be created in the memory separately. So which means that instance variable are nothing but the part of the object. They are dependent on the object. Okay, so for every object there will be a separate copy of instance variable in the memory. That is, sometimes instance variables are also known as object variable because they are specific to a object, right? And the by default value of int id I have written. So the default value of id is 0, and in case of string name, the default value is null because string is a class. Okay, so now a very famous interview question that usually asks to automation testers, that when the instance variable will be created in the memory. Okay, so you have to be very clear in this case that instance variable will be created at the time of object creation, right? By default, the value will be assigned, but the instance variable in the memory will be created at the time of object creation, right? And once our execution has been completed, after that, once the object is destroyed, okay, as part of that object destruction, instance variable will be destroyed. So you have to be mindful about. Okay, so that is the reason the scope of instance variable is same as scope of the object. So now let's talk about what is local variable. Okay, so local variables are those variables which are declared inside any method or inside any constructor or inside any static block, right? So basically local variables will be declared inside any methods only but not outside the method. Okay, so let's see an example of local variables. So for example, as I said, we will be declaring inside any method, right? So if I declare here, let's say string name equal to, let's say I'm saying Shreyansh, okay, and then if I print this, okay, so if I print this, if I run this program, right, so you will see this name will be printed, right? You can see the name is getting printed here. So this is nothing but the local variable. Okay, so one thing you have to remember that in case of local variable, whether it is declared inside any constructor or inside any method, whether it is a static method or non-static method, it must be initialized before you use it or before you print it, right? So what exactly I mean is, let's say if I remove this initialization and let's say if I write only string name, you will get compile time error. So it says variable name might not have been initialized and you are getting the compile time error. So it is mandatory that for the local variable, okay, it should be initialized, okay, otherwise you cannot use it, right? And the other important thing about local variable is you cannot use any access modifiers like public. If I write here public, you will get compile time error for sure because it is a local variable, right? So you can see here modifier public not allowed here. Okay, so the only modifier which is allowed with the local variable is final, right? Final is a non-access modifier. We will talk about final in our next lectures, but you have to remember that with local variables only final is allowed. Okay, yeah, so let's move on to the static variable. So in case of static variable belongs to class. Okay, so static variable belongs to class, and so unlike instance variable, they won't be part of the object. You have to remember that. This is the main difference between instance variable and static variable. So as I have given you an example here, I was creating the three objects, right? Employee 1, employee 2, employee 3. So for every object, a separate copy of instance variable like name and ID were getting created in the memory, right? But in case of static variable, the concept is completely different. In case of static variable, only one time the copy will be created in the memory and it will be reused, and it will be reused by all the different objects. Okay, so that is the reason static variable is a class property and it is not the part of the object. So that is the reason sometimes, let's say I create static variable string, and let's say string, and let's say org name. Okay, so this is a static variable. Why this is a static variable? Since I have declared this variable using the static modifier. Okay, it is a non-access modifier. So once you declare any variable with a static non-access modifier, that will become the static variable. Okay, and it is a class property, so that is the reason sometimes it is also known as class variables. Static variables is also known as class variables. Okay, so in case of static variable, as I said, depending on the number of objects you are creating, okay, it will be only created once, and all these objects will be reusing this variable, right? So now let's see the example of the static variable. Okay, so as I told earlier that static variable will be a class property. It is also known as a class variable because it is not a object specific. So in this example, I have created a very simple employee class, and I have added a static variable which is organization name or org name. Okay, so let's say I have created three objects here, E1, E2, and E3 are the reference variables which are pointing to the different objects. So let's say if I want to update or if I want to initialize this value of the static variable, so I can say E1 dot org name, okay, equal to let's say I will say some XYZ company, or let's say currently let's say ADP, okay, and then if I want to print E1 dot organization name or org name, for employee 1 I'm printing, and then for employee 2 I want to print the org name. Okay, so let me run it and show you the output. So the output should be same, that for all the three employees the organization name is ADP only. So you can see it is printing ADP for all the three employees. So if I change the organization name for let's say first employee, let's say even dot organization name again, okay, so if I print again the organization name for all the three employees, so it will be changed for all the three employees. So let's run it and see. So now you can see that organization name has been changed for all the employees, right? So it shows that a static variable is a class property and it is not specific to any object. If we change the value of the static variable, all the three objects will be reusing the same value or same copy. Okay, and a static variable doesn't get the space in the heap memory, right? It is the part of the non-heap area. Okay, so from JDK, like before JDK 8, it was the part of the method area. Static variables used to get the space in the method area, but from Java 7, after Java 7, like from Java 8, there is a separate space for the static members called meta space. So I hope you are very much clear with the all the three kinds of variables, like instance variable, static variable, and local variable. Thank you.